You might have seen the wonderful news over the weekend that the Israeli Defense Forces Special Forces unit went into southern Gaza and were able to rescue 4 hostages out of the 133 who remained in captivity in Gaza Strip. And this was an unbelievably complex operation that relied on intelligence from the United States and other partners. In the end, the Israeli Defense Forces Special Forces unit lost one of their men, and 200 Palestinian militants were killed as well in the operation. What is interesting about it are the details that are now emerging since the rescue was completed. We got to see the wonderful images of families reunited and people who had been in captivity for over 7 months finally free. But there's more detail here that calls into question the constant drumbeat against the Israelis that the majority of the Palestinians are simply bystanders, innocent bystanders under the captivity of Hamas. Learning how these men and one woman were kept in captivity has shined a light on the probability that those statements are actually propaganda. So I want you to take a look at CNN after the hostages were rescued. And remember, there are still 126, I believe, left in captivity, and those people have been there for 7 months. Many of the ones who we suspect are there possibly aren't alive anymore after an admission from Hamas a few months ago that they can't actually bring forward 40 hostages to complete a ceasefire deal. So keeping those things in mind and the realities of the situation of a nation at war with a close neighbor, watch this video of a CNN guest who's complaining about the hostage rescue, complaints about people being rescued out of captivity. Take a look.
What is your reaction to all that's transpired?
Look, there's no question, whatever. I know there's some dispute about the specific numbers, but what unfolded yesterday was unquestionably a massacre. We have seen the images of the bodies of children littering the streets. We've seen the horrific scenes at the hospitals of weeping parents and bloody children. And to look at an incident of that scale, to see that many casualties and to celebrate this as any kind of success is effectively to say that the lives of Israelis are more valuable than the lives of Palestinians. That is the only way anybody can celebrate this as a success. Now, it's unsurprising that that's the view of the Israeli government. They've made it absolutely clear that they don't value Palestinian lives at all, not just throughout this campaign of assault on Gaza over the past several months, but Israeli policy towards Palestinians for much, much longer. What has been disappointing is the way our government also has reduced the massacre to a footnote and focused primarily on the retrieval of hostages.
So here's an odd and very real bit of common sense for that guest. What if the Palestinians who are holding the hostages on behalf of Hamas simply turned them over? What if they went to the northern edge of Rafah, which is in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, and they simply turned over the hostages to the IDF? What if on one of the phone calls that are made into their cell phones where the IDF says, we are preparing to bomb this section of the city and we notice that you have refugees there and you're one of them, please gather yourself and your family and others around you and remove yourselves from the area because we plan to bomb it in 30 minutes. When they get that phone call, they say, excuse me, please don't bomb just yet. We have all of the hostages that we could find, and we are taking them to that area so that you can retrieve them. So please retrieve them instead of bombing again. What if they did that? Now, naysayers will say, oh, Stacey, that's so Pollyanna. We can't possibly do that. Like, we can't expect them to do that. They're under Hamas. There are 2.2 million Palestinians there. The Hamas fighters number now at around 9,000. Israel has done yeoman's work in destroying between 9 and 15,000 of these terrorists, people who murder, rape, and pillage and then brag about it, people who live stream rapes onto Facebook accounts of their victims. These are the worst of the worst, the lowest of the low, the most depraved, the most indifferent, the most disgusting and repugnant animalistic people on the face of the planet. And so it seems to me like the people who are being held in captivity in an open air prison, not by Israelis, but by Hamas, being used as human shields, would possibly, maybe even a teensy wee little bit, a smidgen, just a teensy tiniest little bit of themselves would say, I wish to be free. I wish to no longer be captive to Hamas and an enemy of the Israelis? Who will provide me with health care and access to a job? And I'll get to live in a home with floors and windows and a roof, and maybe raise my children to have an occupation instead of raising them to be tunnel builders for Hamas. So the person who was on CNN, who was allowed to make these very egregious and suspect statements to the host without any pushback, Frederica, what's up, my dear? Why did you let him roll on like that? Why no pushback? Common sense says that everyone in the world should be supporting the Israelis trying to get their people back. Because if it was Americans only who were taken hostage by a neighbor, we would have bombed them into oblivion, sent in U.S. Special Forces and the 82nd Airborne, and what we left behind would be the responsibility of those who attacked us. That's kind of how we roll with the U.S. military. Now, we do rebuild nations. We do spend tons of US aid all over the globe, money that we have to borrow from China, but we have our own predilections and issues we're working through. We need a life coach here in America. We need a life coach for Congress and maybe 2 or 3 more for the executive branch and SCOTUS. But those are side issues. We're talking about Israel. And what I want to see is for common sense to reign and rule supreme over this issue. All they have to do is give the people back, the bodies and the people, because we know not everyone has survived. The realistic approach would have been for them to have done everything they've done over the past 7 months in a span of about 90 days, which was their original plan. But the Biden administration pushed back on the Israelis and refused to allow them to execute in the way that they wanted. And they listened because we are their closest and largest ally. What a mistake on behalf of Bibi Netanyahu. I don't blame him for it. He was in between a rock and a hard place. But ultimately, the responsibility for the fact that there are still, I believe, between 3 and 5 American citizens being held in the Gaza Strip, that's ultimately the fault of President Biden and the Biden administration, the State Department, the Department of Defense, all of the attendant agencies who attend to this type of a situation. So what do we know now? Well, the Israelis went in under the guise of being refugees themselves, and then they sent in helicopters to do the retrieval. They lost one of their special forces guys in the raid, but they were able to bring 4 people home. And the reunions were so heartwarming and touching to see. The captivity did not crush the spirit of these Israelis. One of them, he's seen on video, doing a little bit of kind of like a march dance into a waiting area where his closest friends had gathered to greet him. And instead of walking in meekly, he kind of stomped his way in with his arms in the air, basically telling them, I'm back. And there was laughter and tears all around when you could see this guy back with his friends. He's young. He's a young man. And now he gets his life back. And that's what we wish for all of the hostages. And I know this doesn't get said often, but I'll say it. I'm just somebody's mom on the radio and TV. I want the Palestinians to have that kind of a life. I want Palestinians to live on their beachfront property gifted to them by the Israelis, making money, having a booming tourism industry, selling their products abroad, and being able to travel on visas, using their passports, living the same advanced society that other westernized nations enjoy. Palestinians could have that. They just have to give up their relationship with Hamas. It's not asking too much, and it's for their betterment. That's what I wish. That's what I wish. That's what I'd say to that CNN guest. Unbelievably, I don't see that in their future, but it is what we all want for them. So up next in our next segment after this break, what is driving all of the media coverage of the Supreme Court? Could it be an attempt to delegitimize a right-leaning court? Details after this.